Karen was supposed to be watching my apartment while I was out, but instead, she'd been having a wild party, and now the fire alarm was blaring. I raced home, my heart pounding, to find the place a mess and Karen nowhere to be seen. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a chaotic chain of events that would turn my world upside down. As I pulled up to my building, I could see the flashing lights of fire trucks out front. Panic surged through me. What on earth had happened? I rushed inside, shouldering past the crowd of confused neighbors. "What's going on?" I demanded, grabbing the nearest firefighter by the arm. "Ma'am, we received a call about a fire alarm being triggered in your unit," he replied sternly. "Is everything all right over there?" I shook my head in dismay. I have no idea. My neighbor was supposed to be watching my place while I was out, but before I could finish, a familiar voice called out from the chaos. "Oh, there you are. I was just about to call you." Karen emerged from the stairwell, looking disheveled but unharmed. I stormed up to her, my blood boiling. "Karen, what the hell did you do?" She held up her hands defensively. "Relax, it was an accident. I was trying to make a TikTok video and I may have accidentally set off the alarm. But no big deal, the fire department is already here to take care of it." I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you serious? Do you have any idea how much trouble you could be in?" "Trouble?" Karen scoffed. "Come on, it was just a silly prank. The firefighters will handle it, no harm done." Just then, a burly firefighter approached us, his expression grave. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me. We have a few questions about the incident." Karen's eyes went wide. "Wait, what? Why?" "It appears the fire alarm was deliberately triggered," the firefighter stated sternly. "That's a criminal offense, and we need to investigate further." My stomach twisted as I watched them lead a protesting Karen away. Part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction, but mostly I was filled with dread over what other consequences might be in store. This was spiraling out of control fast, and I had a sinking feeling it was only the beginning. As I watched the firefighters usher Karen away, a mix of emotions swirled inside me. Part of me felt vindicated that she was finally facing consequences for her reckless behavior, but another part of me dreaded the fallout that was sure to come. I approached the nearest firefighter, determination etched on my face. "Excuse me, what's going to happen to her?" The firefighter regarded me sternly. "We take these kinds of incidents very seriously. She'll be detained and questioned at the station. Depending on what we find, she could be facing charges for false alarm and misuse of emergency services." I nodded grimly. "I see. Is there anything I need to do?" "We'll likely need to speak with you as well," he replied. "You were the apartment owner, correct?" "Yes, that's right." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the ordeal ahead. "All right, whatever I need to do to help, I'll do it." As the firefighters escorted Karen out, I caught a glimpse of the panicked expression on her face. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy, but I quickly pushed it aside. She had brought this upon herself. Once the commotion had died down, I finally made my way back to my apartment, dreading the mess I was about to find. To my surprise, it was relatively tidy. Aside from a few overturned cups and a stack of solo cups on the coffee table, the place was in decent shape. I started tidying up, my mind racing with questions. How had this happened? Karen was supposed to be a responsible, trustworthy neighbor. What had possessed her to pull a stunt like this? And what was I going to do now? Just as I was finishing up, my phone began to ring. I checked the caller ID and felt my heart sink. It was my landlord. "Hello," I answered, bracing myself. "Ah, your name. I'm so glad I caught you," the landlord said, his tone grave. "I'm afraid I have some rather concerning news." I gripped the phone tightly, my heart pounding. What happened? "Well, your neighbor Karen was just brought in for questioning by the police," the landlord began, his voice laced with concern. Apparently, she triggered the fire alarm in your unit as some kind of prank. I know, I was here when it happened, I replied, my frustration growing. The firefighters took her away. I see. The landlord paused for a moment. The thing is, your name. This is a very serious matter. False fire alarms can carry hefty fines and even potential jail time. I felt my stomach drop. Jail time. You can't be serious. I'm afraid so, the landlord said solemnly. And to make matters worse, the fire department is also considering placing a line on your property to cover the costs of their response. What? I exclaimed, my mind reeling. But I had nothing to do with this. Karen was the one who set it off, not me. I understand your frustration, but the fact is, you're the registered tenant, the landlord explained. Legally, you're responsible for anything that happens in your unit, even if it was caused by a guest. I slumped down onto the couch, my head in my hands. This was a complete nightmare. Not only was Karen facing potential criminal charges, but I could be stuck footing the bill for her reckless actions. So, what do I do now? I asked, my voice small. My advice would be to cooperate fully with the authorities, the landlord said. Provide any information they need, and see if you can work out a deal to avoid the lion. I'll do what I can on my end as well, but you may want to consider speaking to a lawyer. I nodded wearily. Okay, thank you. I'll do that. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process everything. How had my simple request for Karen to watch my apartment turned into such a catastrophic mess? I steeled myself and headed out the door, determined to get to the bottom of this and salvage what I could. As I approached the police station, a sense of dread washed over me. This was going to be a long, arduous battle, but I was more resolved than ever to see it through. As I stepped through the doors of the police station, the atmosphere was tense and somber. I approached the front desk, my palms sweating. Excuse me, I'm here about the incident at my apartment earlier, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was told I needed to speak with someone. The officer behind the desk eyed me with a weary expression. Name? Your name, I replied. I'm the tenant whose fire alarm was set off. The officer nodded and gestured for me to follow. Right this way, ma'am. The detective handling the case will want to speak with you. I trailed behind the officer, my mind racing with a million questions. What was going to happen to Karen? What could I possibly say to help my own situation? As we rounded the corner, I spotted Karen sitting in an interrogation room, looking uncharacteristically sullen. The officer led me to a small office where a stern-faced detective was waiting. Have a seat. Your name, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I perched on the edge of the seat, clasping my hands nervously. What's going to happen to my neighbor? I asked. The detective fixed me with a level gaze. That's what we're trying to determine. Can you tell me exactly what happened? I took a deep breath and recounted the events, from Karen agreeing to watch my apartment to the moment the firefighters arrived. The detective listened intently, jotting down notes. So your neighbor admitted to triggering the alarm, but claimed it was an accident? He asked. I nodded. Yes, that's what she told me, and the firefighters. The detective leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. That's not quite what she's telling us. According to her, she set off the alarm intentionally as a prank. My eyes widened in shock. What? No, that can't be right. Karen said it was an accident. Well, we have reason to believe she's not being entirely truthful, the detective replied. The fire department is taking this very seriously, and so are we. False alarms like this can have serious consequences. I felt a lump forming in my throat. But I had nothing to do with this. I was away from the apartment when it happened. How can I be held responsible? The detective folded his hands on the desk. I understand your concern, your name. Unfortunately, as the tenant, you could still be liable for the costs and any legal repercussions. We'll need to investigate further, but I'd strongly advise you to seek legal counsel." As the gravity of the situation sank in, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. This was quickly spiraling out of control, and I was quickly running out of options. I needed to find a way to protect myself, but first, I had to figure out a way to get through to Karen and make her see the seriousness of what she had done. After my conversation with the detective, I requested to speak with Karen. The officer escorted me to the interrogation room, where she sat with her arms crossed, a defiant expression on her face. "Karen, what were you thinking?" I demanded, the frustration evident in my voice. She rolled her eyes. "Relax. Your name. It was just a harmless prank. I didn't expect it to blow up like this." "A harmless prank," I exclaimed, incredulous. "Karen, you set off a fire alarm in my apartment. Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" Yeah, the cop already lectured me about it," she said dismissively. "But it's not like anyone got hurt. I was just trying to have a little fun, that's all." I stared at her in disbelief. "Fun? Karen, this could ruin my life. I'm being held responsible for your actions, and the fire department is talking about putting a lion on my property." Her eyes widened slightly at that. "A lion? Seriously?" "Yes, seriously," I exclaimed, throwing my hands up in frustration. "And that's not all. You could be facing criminal charges for false alarm and misuse of emergency services." Karen's bravado faltered for a moment, and I could see the first glimmer of fear in her eyes. "Criminal charges? But I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Well, it did happen," I retorted sharply. "And now we're both facing the consequences. So you need to start taking this seriously, Karen. Tell the truth, cooperate with the authorities, and maybe we can salvage something from this mess." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze dropping to the table. I don't know what to say. I really didn't think it would be a big deal." "Well, it is a big deal," I said firmly. "And you need to take responsibility for your actions. Because if you don't, it's going to make things a whole lot worse for both of us." Karen remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the realization slowly sinking in. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand the gravity of the situation. As I turned to leave, I shot her one last pointed look. "This isn't over, Karen. Not by a long shot." The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings with lawyers, and endless negotiations with the fire department and local authorities. I was determined to do everything in my power to protect myself from the fallout of Karen's reckless actions. After my confrontation with Karen at the police station, she finally seemed to grasp the severity of the situation. She agreed to fully cooperate with the investigation and provide a truthful account of what had happened. Unfortunately, that didn't make the process any easier. The fire department was adamant about holding someone accountable for the false alarm, and they weren't backing down from their threat of placing a lion on my property to cover the response costs. "This is completely unfair," I argued during a tense meeting with the fire chief and my lawyer. Karen was the one who triggered the alarm, not me. Why should I be the one to pay for her mistake? The fire chief fixed me with a stern gaze. "I understand your frustration, your name, but the fact remains that you are the registered tenant. Legally, you're responsible for anything that happens in your unit, regardless of who actually caused the incident." My lawyer stepped in, her brow furrowed. "But surely there must be some way to hold Karen accountable instead. She's already facing potential criminal charges. Isn't that enough?" The fire chief shook his head. "I'm afraid not. The city has strict protocols when it comes to false alarms and the costs associated with responding to them. We have no choice but to pursue the lion against your property." I felt my stomach twist with dread. This was an absolute nightmare. Not only was Karen facing jail time, but I could potentially lose my home because of her reckless behavior. "There has to be something we can do," I pleaded, my voice laced with desperation. "Please, you have to understand. I had nothing to do with this. I'm the victim here, just like you. The fire chief regarded me with a sympathetic expression. I wish I could help. Your name, but my hands are tied. The best I can suggest is to work with your lawyer to try and negotiate a more manageable payment plan for the land. As I left the meeting, I felt utterly defeated. How had my life spiraled so far out of control? I needed to find a way to fight this, to protect myself from the consequences of Karen's actions. But with the authorities seemingly unwilling to budge, I was running out of options. Determination hardened in my chest. I wasn't going to give up that easily. If the system wouldn't help me, then I would have to find another way to make things right. As I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the lingering scent of smoke from the fire alarm incident, a plan began to form in my mind. I couldn't let Karen's irresponsible actions destroy my life, not without a fight. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's number, my fingers drumming impatiently on the kitchen counter. "We need to get creative," I said as soon as she answered. "I'm not going to let the fire department slap a lion on my property because of Karen's stupid prank." My lawyer sighed heavily. "I understand your frustration, your name, but the options are limited. The authorities are adamant about holding you responsible as the tenant. Then we need to find a way to hold Karen responsible instead," I replied, a spark of determination in my voice. "There has to be something we can do to shift the liability onto her." After a long pause, my lawyer responded cautiously. "Well, there is one possibility, but it's a bit unconventional." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "I'm listening." "Okay, hear me out," she began. "We could try to argue that Karen was acting as an agent on your behalf when she triggered the alarm. If we can prove that, then the liability would shift to her rather than you." I furrowed my brow, mulling over the idea. But how would we prove that? Karen was explicitly told to watch my apartment, not cause a ruckus. True, but we could argue that her actions, even if misguided, were still in service of that directive, my lawyer explained. After all, she was trying to make a TikTok video in your home, which could be seen as a form of watching it. I couldn't help but scoff. "That's a bit of a stretch, don't you think?" "Perhaps, but it's worth a shot," she replied. "The key is positioning it as a case of negligent supervision rather than outright vandalism or criminal behavior. If we can shift the narrative in that direction, it could help us avoid the lion and potentially even get Karen to cover the costs." As much as I hated to admit it, the idea had merit. It was a long shot, to be sure, but at this point, I was willing to try anything to protect myself. "All right, let's do it," I said, determination coursing through me. "I'm ready to take this fight to the next level." My lawyer chuckled dryly. "That's the spirit. Just be prepared for an uphill battle." I glanced around my apartment, a steely resolve hardening in my chest. Trust me, I'm ready. The hearing with the fire department and city officials was tense and emotionally charged. My lawyer presented our case, arguing that Karen had been acting as my agent when she triggered the fire alarm, and therefore the liability should fall on her rather than me. The fire chief listened intently, his brow furrowed. "That's an interesting angle, counselor, but I'm not convinced it holds up. Karen's actions were clearly reckless and intentional, not an act of negligent supervision." My lawyer pressed on, undeterred. "But, Your Honor, the fact remains that Karen was entrusted with the responsibility of watching over my client's apartment. Her actions, while misguided, were still in service of that directive." The city prosecutor chimed in, his tone skeptical. "That's a rather generous interpretation, don't you think? Triggering a fire alarm as a prank is a far cry from watching over the property." I gripped the edge of my seat, my heart pounding. This was our last chance to avoid the devastating lion on my home. Suddenly, Karen's lawyer stood up, a triumphant expression on his face. "Objection, Your Honor. I believe we have evidence that could shed new light on this matter." All eyes turned to him as he produced a stack of papers. My client has come forward with documentation showing that she was explicitly instructed by your name to do whatever it takes to make a viral TikTok video while watching the apartment. Gasps rippled through the room, and I felt my stomach drop. Had Karen betrayed me after all? The fire chief eyed the documents with a frown. If this is true, then it would seem to support the argument that your name bears some responsibility for the incident. My lawyer jumped to her feet, outrage etching her features. Objection. This is clearly fabricated evidence, an attempt to shift the blame. But the judge raised a hand, silencing her. I'm afraid I'm inclined to agree with the fire department's assessment. The evidence presented, while troubling, does appear to implicate your name in some capacity. I stared at Karen in disbelief, my mind racing. How could she do this to me? After all I'd done to try and help her, she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. In the end, the judge ruled that I would be responsible for half the costs of the fire department's response, with the other half falling on Karen. It was a bittersweet victory, but one I had to accept. As I left the courthouse, I caught a glimpse of Karen, smirking triumphantly. In that moment, I realized that true justice had not been served. She had gotten away with her reckless behavior, and I was the one left to pick up the pieces. But I refused to let her have the last laugh. Somewhere, deep within me, a spark of determination had been ignited. Someday, I would find a way to make her pay for what she'd done. This wasn't over, not by a long shot.